Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed lunch. Hope you enjoyed playing with the gadgets and meeting all the people in the exhibition space. There's more time to do that this afternoon, so please do take that chance to go around and say hello to everybody. And particularly Sonia, they've got a quiz running which has got a prize in it, which you can all enter, and so can you online. So this afternoon we're going to do a couple of things back to back. This session is about how we learn. And then the next session is a bit more about who learns what. The Homer Simpson, which essentially is clickbait, is Elaine will explain in a second. But I think the setup to this is I genuinely feel like we talk to ourselves an awful lot about accessibility and disability inclusion. We're really comfortable with doing that. We know all of the ins and outs of accessibility learning and knowledge that we're trying to share, but I don't feel like the dial's moving very fast. And it may be that one of the problems is the way that we're communicating and the way we're thinking about the people that we're communicating with. That maybe sometimes we've got the wrong learner in mind. And so this session popped up from a conversation we had with Elaine and her colleagues about learning styles. And the ways in which we, as the advocates, as the community, as the people who want others to behave in a particular way, we've really got to understand who we're talking to and maybe adapt how we communicate, particularly in our learning resources, particularly in the way we bring people along on the journey that we want them to go. So this is a tee up for that, and we have some fantastic guests to talk us through that. So without further ado, Elaine, you are a behavioural scientist?
Yes, I'm a behavioural scientist at Besset Digital, so we provide behaviour and design solutions for our clients, digital solutions such as learning. So the Homer and Spock analogy is really relevant for us because it's relevant both for our designers and for our clients alike, because so it comes from the theory of thinking fast, thinking slow by Daniel Kahneman, and thinking about the Homer in us. We all have a bit of both, and depending on the scenario, we will be more driven by one or the other, but our Homer response is when we do those automatic behaviours, automatic actions, decision making, where we don't really need to think about it, that they're habitual and that they don't require us to make any effort. So for example, if I say, what's 2 + 2? You automatically think 4. Or if you're an experienced driver, you don't need to think about where the pedals are in the car, you can just do it automatically. Whereas on the other hand, the Spock within us is for those scenarios and decisions that are a little bit more involved, where we might have to stop and think for a little bit, we might have to take pause. So if I said to you, what's 15 times 457? You might have to, I don't know, maybe you won't, but you might have to think for a moment about what that is and work through it. And similarly for somebody who's learning to drive, they have to think more deliberately and more effortfully around, okay, what do I need to do next? So it's about our level of experience and our familiarity with a particular action or decision, whether we need to invoke greater effort and a greater level of thought process and cognitive effort when we're going to make that decision to act.
And presumably, the other bit that I would assume about that model is that the way that we sort of, when we're approaching someone with our Spock mind in a centre sort of stage of what we're thinking about is we're logical. We're presenting them with information in a logical way. We're building up the knowledge for them. We're helping them understand maybe the backdrop to what we're doing, as well as what the task is, what we're doing. Whereas maybe Homer's more like, is this going to be in the test? That's also what I've got in mind in sense of how we're approaching those learners and how they would like us to behave to make it easy for them to adopt the easy stuff. I'm guessing that's part of that behavioural sort of model.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all want things to be easy. We want to have to, our roles, and particularly in our jobs, if this is part of our roles, we want to be able to do it in a way that takes less effort. People are very busy. So, if we can, start off maybe with a Spock type of approach where people think about what it is they need to do in terms of accessibility, but over time then with that habitual repetitive behaviour then that it becomes automatic and that it becomes a Homer response, that it's, I just do this on an automatic basis. This is my automatic reaction to this scenario, that I'm going to include accessibility in this way and consider it in every step of my process.
And you're designing learning resources across a range of topics. So I'm guessing this is something that pops up in everything you do in some way. That how does this play out when you're actually implementing the learning experience and the resources you're working with on your clients?
Yeah, so like from a behavioural science perspective, if we we try and reduce the barriers. So we try and think about, okay, what is the barrier here, say, for the client or for the designer? Why are they not thinking this should be included, or why does it just not come into the psyche? So what we would do from a behavioural science perspective is to try and remove that barrier, try and find ways to, rather than using a stick, a more of a carrot approach, and say, well, if you don't do this, here's what you could be missing out on. Or we use credible messengers, and we say, well, look, here's what people that you admire do. They approve of this. They think that this is the way forward. And, really importantly, sometimes a designer might think, well, is there going to be a trade-off by having some level of accessibility included here? But actually, some of the most, biggest organizations, the people who they would look up to the most, it's seen as a mark of the utmost quality, in fact. So when you communicate things like that, that helps to get people on board and to understand that this isn't actually something that's going to slow us down. It's actually going to progress us. And I think the other important thing is to try and have people walk in the shoes of the learner for a while, because often it's difficult to understand why they need to design things in a certain way. But when we can give examples and, have us walk through and run through what it actually feels like for a learner with particular accessibility needs or with particular disability, then we can get a better insight into why we need to change the design of things to align with that.
Right, so that's an empathy building, I guess, at that simple level there, is sort of showing and letting people draw the conclusion about what they could do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, in terms of your worker in particular, is one more dominant than the other? Is there more Spock? Are we more Spock than Homer? How does that play out in the sense of that change? Is it situational?
I think any time we implement a new change, we don't like change. Nobody really likes a big change. So initially that Spock has to be, he has to drive our behavior. So we do have to stop and think, but, if we do, it is good to have an element of Spock that we're not just being very reactive. So when we think about things, if we're objective, if we're think critically and do things in a quite a methodological way, then we can become confident in it, and then that leads to a Homer response. So we can then do it automatically, and we don't need to think about it. But I do think it starts off with a little bit more effort, and then by doing that in the right way, it leads to a much more automatic response then.
Right, and presumably by implementing this, you see more successful learning outcomes. I guess that's the point of it, that more people do the things that whatever the role is, the more things that they do fit in with the model of whatever you're trying to share.
Yeah, of course, because the aim is for everybody to get an equal learning experience. So if we can include that from the outset, then that's always what we would strive to do.
And are you doing that within the design of the actual e-learning resources that you're building and so on, like the reward systems and the speed at which people are learning and the types of learning that you're doing? That's the way that plays out, I guess.
Yes, exactly. So we have our very talented accessibility lead who makes sure that we don't miss out on anything that we do in our design, so that it covers all of what we need to.
Cool. So thank you very much. That's really helpful. Zoe, could you tell us a bit about your role and a bit about the learning resources that you've implemented within Hargreaves Lansdown?
Yeah, sure. I'm Zoe Portlock. I work at Hargreaves Lansdown, or HL. It's a financial services company based in Bristol, and it's the UK's biggest saving and investment platform. So my role there is accessibility lead. I effectively trying to make things as easy as possible for product managers, designers, developers, testers to embed, make sure that what they're creating is accessible to everyone. So there's been a big piece of work this year, which Mark wanted me to cover. We did a piece of learning which scaled up people who had accessibility training from 25 people who were our accessibility ambassadors or in our working group to the entire company, which is over 1,500 people. So a very big change in the socialization of a lot of things. And it coincided with a big redesign of that whole process. So we're talking about Spock and Homer, and there's a bit of dread around e-learning, which was the format of this module. People very much think, will this be on the test? I want to get through this. So did a big user experience review of that whole process and launched it alongside this module to help make it a more positive experience, less frustration. But also, it marked the socialization of some really big changes we've been making as a business. So we had reapproached how the color palette is used to make sure that color contrast isn't an issue. And we'd also put in a lot of work to change our entire brand font, our main font. And this module got to share that news with everyone. It wasn't just, what is accessibility? Why does it matter? It was also, here are some practical things that you need to know about how we communicate, both externally and internally, because colleagues matter too. There are colleagues with disabilities. They deserve just as much effort to make their workplace accessible as the end customer externally. So that piece of work, it scaled up learning, people who were trained up by over 9,000%, and has had some really positive attention. We have an award ceremony that we were shortlisted for because of it, just because of the scale of it and all of these changes that came in at the same time, and the impact it had. So
that's tomorrow. Fingers crossed for tomorrow.
Yes.
In terms of the changes that you made and the sense of shift by making this change in the way that you approached it, did you feel like it was a dramatic shift in the way that the learning resources were designed, or was it, I mean, from an accessibility point of view, was it common sense? How much was that change tangible to you?
Yeah, so over a large organization, there are a lot of different people creating training on a lot of different formats. So whilst we looked at the e-learning modules themselves, engaged with the supplier, I taught a lot of their designers a lot of best practice, worked very directly with them, but alongside that, we created resources that would help people who are designing training outside of that e-learning modules, because we all have to do them, tax evasion, data protection, that kind of thing. But there's so many teams creating training resources. So that involved decks that explained 10 core elements of accessibility that helps explain the scope of things. It's not just alt text and it's not just color contrast, whilst those are important. We really need to think about motion and animation, and if we're using that in a way that is hindering comprehension. So it was came from a lot of different angles and was very functional. So we hit the mark of the Homer Simpson, will this be on a test? Made it very clear what the structure of the whole thing was, lots of helpful headings and an overall structure to lead you through the journey, but also gave those options to dive in deeper. So we had those resources for those who were keen, like the Spock learners, who wanted to understand more about how they could apply it to their specific role or how they could be using PowerPoint in a more accessible way. We very much went forward with the Homer situation of, we know you don't like doing e-learning. I know this isn't a pleasant part of your role, but let's make it as easy as possible, and signpost those who were more engaged to get involved with what we were doing. And we found that for sure. People signed up to the newsletter. We had a big rush of people joining Teams channels, and generally entire departments engaging with their existing resources and making those changes that were socialized through this piece of learning. It had a big effect. It was really great to see it. It's very much it represents a whole journey that we went on as a business.
And how long have you been working on that particular project yourself?
The e-learning or the journey?
That part of it, yeah.
So we were involved with the agency for about a year, trying to change how things were currently set up to be more on brand and more accessible, but ultimately did an entire rebrand of the whole template. So we've been working with them for about a year and a half, and then the e-learning module itself took 9 months to craft to be as helpful, accessible, interesting as possible.
Cool. And one other little gem that you're missing out of that is it's become mandatory.
Yes.
Because you said 1,500, but you didn't say that is everybody. It's been actually made mandatory within the training. And obviously, from your organizational point of view, as you're saying, there are other mandatory training, but putting it alongside that must have a significant impact, not necessarily just today, but in the future. Everybody's going to go through that hoop at some point in there.
It sets the tone. It's part of inductions. It's being repeated every year. This is a cultural change. This is what we need to be thinking about now. And it's framed in that way. It explains how it relates to our business strategies and business values. But yes, it is mandatory. And those e-learning modules, I was doing the testing with Emma, my colleague, who is in the audience here. We were doing that engagement with the supplier to help things become more accessible. And while we were doing that, we knew these went out to every single colleague, and you have to read them. Workday, make sure that you engage with every little bit. So we were like, could we use this platform? Let's have some conversations. And I spoke to our sponsor. We're lucky to have an ExCo sponsor. I know the next session is all about speaking to C-suite and ExCo. So we spoke to him. It was quite a minimal budget for the impact it would have. Agreed it all, and then started crafting it, and it became a mandatory piece of learning that every colleague has to do every year and every new starter. So really increase the level of how it's seen. It's not an add-on, it's not a nice thing to have. It is, you know, a core part of how you use our brand, how you talk to your colleagues, how you talk to the clients. Really helped lift the image of accessibility.
When you said that in the meeting we were in originally, there was an audible gasp in the room when people said, it's mandatory, she made it mandatory. That's obviously the direction we all want to travel. But thank you, it's wonderful, wonderful story, and amazing piece of work.
Thank you.
Jonathan, change direction a little bit, but keeping that learning in mind. Can you tell us a little bit about the organisation you work for and where you're from, but particularly the learning elements that you're doing in schools and some of this stuff that connects into sort of learning styles and what people want to learn?
Sure. My name is Jonathan Marriot. I am the Director of Accessibility Advisory Services at the Rick Hansen Foundation. I speak to you in a very strong English accent, but I'm very proud to call Canada my home. So the Rick Hansen Foundation, if you're not familiar with it, in 1985, Rick Hansen went around the world using his mobility device. 26 months, 40,000 kilometers, and I think he visited 36 countries. During that time, when he returned to Canada in 1988, he wanted to create a legacy, and we have a small but mighty mission. So we encourage innovative solutions that lead to a global movement to remove barriers for people with disabilities. I myself am a very proud member of the neurodivergent community, and I am a white male with dark blonde hair, and I'm 41. So in terms of the different programs that we have at the Rick Hansen Foundation, we have 7 different programs. So I look after the program in relation to the built environment. Some of you may be familiar with LEED or BREEAM, which is a building certification program. We're the same, but for the built environment. One of the other programs which we have is our schools program. So with our schools program, we're very proud to be integrated with every province and territory across Canada. And what our aim was with the schools program, we know that we need to take a holistic approach towards accessibility. It's not just one area. We need to have, I call it that full circle. Today, many of you are in the digital sphere. I'm in the built environment, but we need to have those other elements. One of the things that we always speak about with our accessibility is meaningful. You can have a building that is accessible, but if you don't have accessible policies, digital, etc., it's not. So that leads on to the schools program. So last year, we interacted with over 50,000 students across Canada. We are integrated in some sort of way. Our schooling system is slightly different by province and territory, but we're integrated with every single territory and province in relation to the schools program. So what is the schools program? Well, the schools program is twofold. One, we have an ambassador program, and that is people with lived experience go into schools and they're able to talk about their experience. And very clear, we spoke about earlier with Stella Young, there's a difference between kind of that, I'm borrowing Stella's words here, that inspiration porn. That is what we are not. We give the opportunity for people to go in and talk about their experiences. So it's all the way through from kindergarten through to grade 12, which I think here is year 11. So what our program does is there's kind of 3 different elements. One of them is about having maybe at school assembly, you can have a person with lived experience and they'll talk about what they've done. We have Paralympians, we have people from all kind of different areas, and they're able to talk about, you know, what they've done. But what we were clear is we wanted to provide a very safe environment for people to ask questions, and particularly children in this instance. Because sometimes we notice, and I notice in my work definitely, if we don't have the language to talk about accessibility and disability, we don't have the conversations. Sometimes because people are scared of saying the wrong thing, and other times because people don't think about it. So we have discussions, and again, it's relevant to the different ages that we're talking about. So we have discussions on why do some people prefer language first, person first, or identifying with their disability first. We also look at other areas as well in terms of considerations for other people in the class who may have a disability and what you can look at in the school environment. So we encourage students to become school inspectors, that we call. And I should say all of this information is open. If you go to our website, you can get all of these tools. For the younger years, there's a lot of different activities, and it's things like accessible physical education, accessible playgrounds, and then it goes all the way through into more kind of equity, diversity and inclusion, and celebrating those aspects. It's very much not what we kind of heard earlier in terms of don't bully people with a disability. It's so much more than that. So that was kind of like our main approach that we have. But then from that, we have lots of different activities. So people can do deeper dives in their classrooms around these areas. But it was so interesting because one of the outputs that we had from this, we had an amazing response from students as well as the teachers. But then we had kind of another, this is the second prong, is the teachers came to us and said, this is great, but actually for us to deliver it, I think we need a little bit of upskilling. And again, the opportunity to ask questions around it. And we're not only talking about kind of the main barriers that we know, but also other things in terms of systemic barriers that there may be, you know, maybe in terms of to the piece that we're learning, people learn in different ways. Some people is a show and tell, some people want to do that. So that's what it ended up. It ended up with a schools program for youth as well as a more kind of formalized for the school boards as well as the teachers there.
So I love the way that grows organically, but also that it starts at that relatively simple level of ask us stuff, talk to us, integrate. And that's obviously that initial level of contact. In terms of its development, is there a plan for it to be more integrated in schools? Will it remain separate from the school system? Could it be something that's built into the curriculum? Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, so it is definitely, so different curriculums in different provinces, because we're governed by provinces and territories, have different requirements, but it does sit under the different kind of mandates of each different province. Within that, we then have districts, but the uptake has been amazing. You know, even saying last year, 50,000 people were able to interact with. So all of it is present in every single different province. And the other thing to speak about as well, which is extremely important for us, we have a presence in different territories as well, and our First Nation communities. And within that and the different provinces that we're in, it's been tailored to that approach, being culturally respective as well. So yes, is the short answer. It is involved in all of them.
And I guess the common ground in terms of the learning and the learning piece, and also I guess the reason it's interesting having reference to school children, not least because we talked about the need for that cultural shift as well as the technical knowledge. How do I put alt text on Instagram is not the same as how do I talk to disabled people around me and how do I integrate that into my workplace. That's the parallel, I think. It's a very strong crossover in learning and learning styles and not treating it as a very standalone subject. Similarly within teaching, I guess having the teachers involved, I guess the parallel in workplaces, possibly line managers or other experts within your network that you're turning to when you're looking for help. So a final question then, do you think that with the sorts of things that we're talking about, I'll ask you first, Elaine, do you think that we're going to be seeing more of this? I was actually going to ask you a question about AI, but I'm a bit scared about how many minutes we've got left. But do you think we can see more of this learning style coming in? Do your clients look for this more sort of flexible, I guess it's mixed method of learning?
I mean, we would have a minimum standard ourselves that we would hold ourselves to, and then, you know, so then we would have clients that are now, it's becoming more important for them. It's becoming more of a discussion topic. It's definitely something that people are more aware of, and we will always, you know, try to encourage that as well. Yeah. You know, because of the level of importance. But you know, everybody in our organisation is very much aware and experienced within that now. So it's not as much of a challenge maybe as it was a few years ago.
Cool. And Jonathan, you're describing something that's becoming more integrated in the sense of working with schools. Are you also working with adults? Is it part of a sort of mission to grow that?
Absolutely. We work with adults. We have lots of different programs. We have in-person ones. We work with a lot of people who are represented. I'm covered by so many NDAs, but a lot of people who are in this room, your American branches, your American or Canadian branches, we're working with already. So yes, we have different again, very similar to what we're talking about, but providing language and etiquette and so much more. You know, what do you call different mobility devices? So you have that language and you're able to approach the conversation.
And Zoe, that's clearly the spirit of what you've done with that learning program is to bring some of those things to the surface and tidy them up and make them more connected and make it more meaningful for the learner. What sort of metrics have you been given around that? What are you looking for personally to change as that program rolls through, as more people use that mandatory training? What are you going to be looking for as the signs of success?
A great question. I think it's looking at organic use of our brand around the business in risk, in help desk, our customer service agents, is seeing those combinations of our brand that were once used very frequently but did not meet the WCAG guidelines, seeing those taper off and not get used, or seeing the new font being used, or seeing our design system being referenced, and that happening separate to our accessibility community of practice, that happening in wide teams, people putting out PDFs that are far more accessible. It's just seeing it organically in a space that you haven't directly engaged with. It's a delight when you see that.
I vote for that one. So thank you very much, everyone. That's a wonderful little glimpse there, I think, of starting with the Homer Simpson and the way of thinking about the learner, but also looking at the nature of the different learning programs, bringing in different learners with different needs, different systems, different ways of working. And then obviously, Zoe's going to be available afterwards to explain exactly how she made it mandatory in her organisation, because that's the one we're all wondering. So thank you very much. A wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you.